Throughout this short film, I will be driving on some of New Zealand's main state highway located on the lower half of the North Island. I'll be providing some observational research on New Zealand's roadside crosses. These roadside crosses aren't exclusively a New Zealand phenomenon, but they're very common here. Some other cultures will call them roadside memorials or roadside shrines, but I've usually heard them being referred to as roadside crosses here in New Zealand, so that's what I'll refer to them as. What I want to show from this film is a general pattern of what kinds of objects are placed by or on the site. So this footage is meant to provide just some observational research which will help to understand the types of common objects and appearances that a New Zealand roadside cross would have. These roadside crosses get their name because of their most common object being a cross. Although crosses aren't always needed to make up the memorial site, you can still see roadside crosses without a cross. So the first most prominent display I observed was artificial flowers. Almost all crosses had them. They were all very faded, which told me the site was reasonably old, although I wasn't able to very accurately get an idea of how old they actually were because of how fast the New Zealand sun can fade plastic fabrics, which is what the flowers were made out of. There were some crosses that had real flowers, and these were very well maintained and close to houses. Other prominent features was the colour of the cross. Most of the time it was painted white, although sometimes they were left unpainted. All the sites were very personalised, so all were very decorated in a way that you were able to tell that the family or friends who made the site took care in providing objects that showed the personality of the victim. As an example, some sites had toys on the ground near the cross. I did find one site that only incorporated this, so there were two toys, a unicorn and I think a teddy bear. They were tied together and pulled against a power pole near the road. Many sites would have a range of objects. One site I came across incorporated a lot of different things. So there was a rugby jumper attached to a power pole above everything else in the memorial, a bouquet of artificial flowers along with some pink real flowers near the ground on the site, various bandanas in different colours, a shell and bead necklace, a small white cross with the name of the victim, a car number plate, and an alcoholic drink in a glass bottle. Here I noticed that the cross was not the centerpiece for the site. Instead it was the rugby jumper that was made to represent the victim the most. Another site I came across had a welding helmet above a small silver painted cross. Once again, the cross in this site was not the centerpiece. Instead, it was the more personal item from the victim, in this case being the welding helmet. The site also had some artificial flowers, a piece of a car number plate and some alcohol cans. There were also some elements of the victim's car with yellow fluffy dice hanging near the cross on one side, and the victim's name was also printed onto the cross. This cross also had faded artificial flowers. Its personalised object was a dream catcher, which hung on the side of the white cross. There was some silver tinsel also attached to the cross, and some of the flowers and tinsel had slowly started to fall off and sit near the site on the ground. This roadside cross was attached to a fence. This roadside cross was not painted white, but it did show many similarities to the ones that I just showed. This site used a lot of flowers and had some small flower pots. Another cross that had flower pots was this one. This one was again a white painted cross, although there were pink flowers painted onto it. It also had flowers surrounding it and had small artifacts like a small Buddha statue and a tiny grey car, and a garden statue of a tui. There were also alcohol cans at the foot of the cross. This roadside cross is an example of a site not using a cross. it's using an old tree stump. It also has been here for a very long time. The date I read on the information provided was around 2008. There are flowers, a picture of the victim, and some information on their death. Some beads of a necklace is also attached to the picture frame that holds the picture and information. There is also a long piece of fabric that is wrapped around the stump to keep everything in place. Much like the roadside cross that had the dream catcher, this one is also on a fence. Flowers and the name of the victim was also attached to the fence. I did find one cross that was on the fence that didn't have flowers. It was also a white cross and had the name of the victim. There was a glass bottle attached to the fence next to the cross, which had some dirt inside it. This might have been where flowers once were. This one was located on a bridge and it wasn't entirely easy to walk to. It had a colourful wind decoration, a cross with white painted symbols on it and flowers. These two crosses were also on a fence and they were near a railway station. One had flowers and used an unpainted stick for its cross. The one next to it was a white cross which didn't have any flowers. This cross was completely covered in flowers. Some roadside crosses I've been seeing for years as I drive up and down this island, and this is one of them. It has two Samoan flags attached to it on top of the cross. The cross is completely made out of flowers, which go by the flag's colour. It stands out within its surroundings because of the colours, and there is also alcohol bottles at the foot of the cross. If there was information about the victim, then some would have the date of death, while others would just have the name or a sentimental statement of remembrance. This site also had a white cross. Its personalised items included objects like string and beaded necklaces draped over the cross. It also had the letter T that was carved into a white piece of wood. There were rocks, pebbles and paua at the front of the cross. So a pattern I did find was many sites would have alcohol bottles or cans at the bottom of their crosses. Every site I saw with alcohol all had different brands, which made me assume the drinks displayed were personalized to the preferences of the victims. Usually all the crosses were painted white, although I did see some without paint. The materials of the crosses would vary, but most of them were made out of wood, but some were made out of plastics or thin metals. Pieces of patterned fabrics like bandanas were also seen at some sites. These were able to be seen in the roadside crosses like the Dreamcatcher one and the rugby jumper one. Some would also have flags, although this wasn't as common as things like necklaces and shells and beads. Almost all of them were on the ground, placed in the grass on the side of the road, but some were placed on bridges, fences, or tree stumps. These ones placed on the bridges were harder to access, so I wasn't able to film most of the crosses I saw while driving over bridges. Those that weren't on the ground still incorporated similar elements as the ones that were, especially the flowers, although their decorations would be smaller. Flowers were almost always seen. Most of the colours were red, pink, or blue flowers. These sites are ritualistic practices designed to symbolize a person who lost their life while either on or near the road. These sites can also sometimes be used as a reminder to the public of the dangers of the road. I have had to make some ethical considerations when doing this observation. So these considerations were towards the memorials. So I've provided no verbal descriptions of exact identities of the victim, which I have done to protect their privacy. I have provided observations only, and this has been to help report on what I have seen respectfully and to help me coincide with the ASAANZ and the Treaty of Waitangi. My observations are the product of non-participant observations and my experience driving through the North Island. I have actually never personally been connected to a roadside cross, therefore my observations remain on an outsider's point of view. But I do travel frequently in the area, which has provided me with some awareness of the road and I have also noticed when crosses are put up and when these crosses are taken down. My interpretations and observations are influenced by my academic studies in university, and my methods of researching has been taught to me mainly through anthropology and psychology. My interpretation of this ritual is mostly influenced by Western methods of understanding, and I have had some influence in indigenous studies from my university, which I find more intriguing and engaging for my perspectives on cultural and social sciences. The reasons I've been calling these roadside crosses a ritual is because they provide a concept of liminality within a rites of passage. What I mean by this is the roadside crosses are providing an intermediate state that people can be placed into when going through a transition from one important stage to another. This happens frequently with rituals towards cultural and self-identity changes. It is an important part of a rites of passage, which is what many ritual practices provide. In this case, roadside crosses provide a place of liminality to occur by giving a place for people to connect with the dead. The dead is considered to have entered a different stage in their rites of passage by simply being deceased. The dead are in the post-liminal stage and the living are in the pre-liminal stage. The memorials also serve a place for the locale, which provides a place for social interaction between the preliminal and the postliminal. These visits from friends and family and the objects placed at the site hold the ritual in the community. This film has been designed not to provide anything particularly special or striking, but more simply to just provide some visual information to coincide with some spoken information. So hopefully this is what I've achieved through making this. Thank you for taking the time to watch and listen.